Today I want to talk about a serious topic that I can now reflect on. This is challenging. It's about depression. Okay, so it's a serious topic, but I was just listening to a podcast with Dr. Mike and Brian Johnson, and at the end of the podcast, they discussed depression. Very uncomfortable topic. I've been in it at least 2 times that I can clearly remember, and maybe as we scan through my memory and I discuss the ways I got out of it, we can revisit that. So Dr. Mike introduces this interesting idea about depression. I'm going to talk about this very analytically because I don't know your life, but I want to help you solve it because this is so personal to me, and I had to solve it twice, and I never had a framework to solve it. But now that I listened to what they said, I think I do at least get the starts of it, or at least what's worked for me. So maybe this can help you too. Depression, 2 things Dr. Mike kind of presents. He says, first factor about depression is your natural proclivity to be depressed. So we all operate on these different levels of happiness, everywhere from depressed to, let's call it manic or crazy or super excited. Now, where you fall on that spectrum, unfortunately, you don't get to choose. Genetics, blah, blah, blah. We'll go with that. And so, let's say depression is anywhere below my pointer finger here. And let's say you naturally sit a little bit below average. I would generally say I'm probably a good bit below average because I've dipped into it twice. You have these sort of parameters. Some people are always super happy, and it would take something crushing to get them there, or maybe they would just never get there. Yeah, that's one factor. So where you sit naturally here. Then you have life circumstances. So you imagine as you trace through life, years on the x-axis, you find the combination of circumstances that you're in, work, health, relationships, etc. They mix and match you up and down this ladder. And so if you're naturally pretty low and then you get put in a circumstance, this is like the circumstantial logic, it can really hit, right? And when I reflect on where I was, that's really the truth for me. The first time I got depressed, or that I suffered from depression, I want to say I was in 6th grade. And you go, Luke, how do you even remember if you had depression in 6th grade? Well, I can't remember clearly, but what I do know that I had was an eating disorder. And that eating disorder quickly resolved itself after a change in my circumstances. Not to get too into the details, but I was in 6th grade. I felt trapped in my environment. I was going to a school that didn't push me, that I didn't feel like I could succeed in, that I didn't really have a social circle. And I was very scared to take this next step, which was moving into the city, into a massive school, basically going to high school early as a 6th grader. And I knew I needed to do it, but I was super scared about doing it. This kind of makes me sound like I was gifted. I was not gifted. I'm above average in intelligence, but there are many other people in this program that I was accepted into, many of which who I'm still friends with to this day. But the point is, in that moment, I felt trapped in my social, my career, being a kid, my school, and it manifested as an eating disorder. I had anorexic tendencies, so I would restrict the food I was eating, and I lost a ton of weight. Super weird at 10 years old, you're 95 pounds. At 11 years old, you're at 85 pounds. That doesn't happen. The reason that happens is either a physical condition, right, or a mental condition, and so I definitely had a mental one. And as I switched schools, I kind of snapped out of that. And I don't know if it resolved overnight, but within that year, it resolved itself. So that's the first time in my life I was 11 or 12 years old. So you think natural baseline and circumstances. Your circumstances can push you under. In that case, they pushed me under. Second time that I can think of vividly is in college. I was in college, and in high school, I had ups and downs, but I wouldn't say I was ever depressed at any point. In college, maybe around my 2nd or 3rd year, I once again realized I didn't fit in. Combination of things. Combination of I wanted to be an entrepreneur mixed with a healthy amount of I didn't really like my social circle at the time. I didn't agree with them. So I wanted to be an entrepreneur, and I didn't love my social circle at the time. I made friends with basically people just like to go out to party and drink, and I didn't like that. And so I was fighting with these 2 aspects of my circumstances that boxed me in. I felt like I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I didn't like the people around me, but I couldn't drop out because that would put me on a path where I couldn't be successful, let's call it. And I was super scared about the decision. And when I stayed in that position and I didn't drop out, it got worse and worse and worse and worse. I gained weight. I wasn't happy. I wasn't going out. I wasn't seeing friends, anxious tendency, all of the above. My company suffered, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think for me, I'm naturally a little bit of a lower baseline. I'm maybe more unfortunately pessimistic by my worldview, but that doesn't mean I can't be happy. But then when you put me in a circumstance that plunges me below that, it can be very challenging. You oftentimes can't change how you feel. You can't change your natural level, but what you can change is your circumstances. And so maybe you can look around and think to yourself, what decisions do I feel trapped in? What am I assuming right now that's making me sad? For me, I was assuming that I couldn't drop out of college because that was too risky, and it is extremely risky. but I also didn't want to be in college because I knew at my heart I was an entrepreneur. And so I had to pick a path, and I picked the path of entrepreneurship, and I haven't plunged back into that hole since. Now, it was not immediate, but within I want to say that first, like, let's say year, I was out of it. After I dropped out for real the second time, I haven't looked back. That was at the age of 21. And so I share this framework with you because depression is very challenging. And the only way I can describe it when you're in it is like you feel like nothing that you're doing matters or that you have control over it. You don't have any goals. If you do have goals, you don't truly care about them because you think that nothing matters. And the reason usually for me that I thought nothing mattered was because I was trapped. And regardless of what I do, I lost agency. If I stayed in school, it wouldn't matter because I needed to be an entrepreneur. And if I dropped out, it wouldn't matter because that was too big of a risk. And then I would be unsuccessful both ways. I perceived a lack of options. Depression was perceiving a lack of options. And eventually, I realized that there was an option, there was a path, and I went down that path. And in both cases, I got out of it. But, I may go into it again in my life. And so I'm documenting this to hopefully remind myself. And if you're watching and you've had to deal with these things, you're not alone. A lot of people have. Fortunately, most haven't. But if you're, one of the few who has had to deal with, deep depression or deep anxiety, I hope these things can help. I think there are ways you can combat this, like pharmacologically, and that's good. I never went those routes because I knew that something was wrong with my circumstances, and I didn't want to explore the other options until I explored my circumstances. And when I fixed these circumstantial things, that did help. So that is kind of my journey. I'm documenting this. I hope this helps. I don't know everything. Use this if it's useful. If you can relate, I hope it does. And good luck. Thanks for watching.